The legal changes Kansas Attorney General says could prevent attacks like the Enigma nightclub shooting. Plus, the backroom deals that let the legislature override the governor. But first, a billion-dollar mystery gets lawmakers grudging support. What does it all mean for you? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. It was a crazy busy week at the State House this week with billions of dollars and your vote on the line. Let's begin with a look at how a mystery business won lawmakers' votes despite some deep reservations. KX Jackson Overstreet takes a look at the debate.
Our first and only item on business today is Senate Bill 347.
Otherwise known as the Apex Bill, which would create an incentive package of tax breaks and other measures for the state to use to recruit mega projects to come here to Kansas.
The hypothetical company that we keep hearing about is willing to make a $4 billion investment in the state of Kansas.
The Kansas House took the bill up for a vote Tuesday afternoon. The House version of the bill features several amendments that would change when the incentives are paid out and gives extra oversight to the State Finance Council to approve a final deal. Opponents say the tax incentives are too much of a giveaway and that the state has been too secretive by keeping the business proposing the $4 billion investment hidden.
How can you represent your constituents if you have signed a non-disclosure agreement that says you will not tell them what you did or why you supported this legislation?
While supporters say the situation isn't perfect, the Apex Bill is needed for Kansas to compete for these types of projects.
We have been in competition for approximately 11 other large companies to the tune of 58,600 jobs. That's how many we've lost.
The bill ultimately passing the House 81-40.
The clerk will record the vote.
And the governor has now signed that bill into law, saying it will make Kansas an economic powerhouse and bring thousands of jobs to the state. Here to help us break out what this means for Kansans this week, we have Republican State Representative Brett Fairchild from St. John and Democratic State Representative Henry Helgerson from here in Wichita. Thank you both so much for being here. And we're going to start off with a lot of Kansans very concerned about what all this means. Not much transparency here. How does something like this happen with so little transparency? That's what a lot of Kansans want to know. Brett, let's start with you.
Well, there's absolutely no transparency to it at all. You know, it kind of reminds me of back in 2010 or 2012, somewhere in there. I don't remember exactly when it was, but when the U.S. House of Representatives was trying to pass Obamacare, and Nancy Pelosi famously said, you know, we need to pass this bill in order to find out what's in the bill. Well, that's exactly what happened here too, because, you know, most of us don't even know what company this is or where they're going to be located at, but yet it still passed with 80+ votes anyway. And so it's just that type of situation with no transparency. But, you know, even if I knew what the company was, I would never vote to give taxpayer money to any company. And, you know, this is a bill that is worse on the House side than it was on the Senate side, because on the Senate side, they took out the refundable tax credits on their side. And that's basically where the state is actually writing checks to a company out of the state general fund. And they put that back on the House side, which means just outright subsidies to corporations, to this one corporation. And I'm just strongly opposed to that. I don't believe that we should ever be giving out corporate welfare. You know, it goes against free market principles. I think that we need to just have a policy of, you know, free markets, lowering the corporate tax rate, making ourselves more competitive. But I don't believe that we should have crony capitalism, corporate welfare, and I think it's basically just theft from the poor and the middle class in our state to a wealthy corporation that nobody even knows who this company is.
Henry, what are your thoughts?
You may say ditto?
Why did I have a feeling you were going to say something like that?
First, there's two or three different issues. First, there is the issue that it was one company that's going to make a deal in the next 2 weeks, and we gave all of these possible incentives. Second is that nobody, as you said, nobody knows the deal. And the third is, this is not a one-time thing. This is a regular going program that's now in place for the next couple of years. Let me ask the viewers out there a question. Since I've been in politics off and on for 40 years, would you trust the previous governors or candidates for governor and the head of the Department of Commerce to give away $4 billion without any conversations or discussions with other legislators? I think generally nobody would agree to that kind of a thing. We are giving the farm away, and there's limited discussion. Now, I spent a couple hours today meeting with the governor's office and going through the finances, what they have to do and how it blends with everything. And they think that they can do everything in their budget with this giveaway program. We'll wait and see. But there's real questions about the confidentiality, the ongoing program, and it's whether or not, and you and I agree, we believe that maybe government shouldn't be picking the winners and losers.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in there because when I've discussed this on previous shows, I've had the same sort of agreement between the Republican and Democratic representatives or senators that I've had on, and yet this passed. So if everybody dislikes it, how did it become law?
Well, I think probably a lot of the Democrats voted for it because it was something that Governor Kelly wanted. Probably a lot of the Republicans voted for it because they wanted to go along with House leadership because they supported it. And so I think for a lot of people it's not necessarily based on principle, but it's based on going along with your party leadership. And I think, those of us who are more independent minded are the ones who voted against it because we saw this as being a bad deal for Kansas and unfair to average citizens. And I do think it's interesting that Representative Helgerson, I think, is probably more fiscally conservative and responsible than most of the Republicans we have up there. That's what I say to a lot of people. That's what I like about him is that he's independent minded and he's more fiscally conservative in his beliefs than most Republicans up there in Topeka.
Henry, what do you thoughts on this? How did this happen?
I appreciate your kind words. As you're up there longer, you get more conservative, I think, because you see how things fail. And elected officials sometimes feel like, well, we have to do something to create jobs. No, what you do is you stand out of the way and let business create jobs. Put a fair tax structure together. Lower taxes when you get the opportunity with some extra funds. Pay down debt. Those kind of things. And you do the core services. Kansas has gotten itself into a lot of problems when we've gone too far. And, we're both of the opinion that they've gone too far on this. Hopefully it'll come out all right, but it sets a bad precedent.
Well, and we'll have to wait and see what that precedent does. We've got many months and years ahead of us. The last thing on that I want to look at is clawbacks, because a lot of concern, we have definitely seen this happen in Wichita, where governments provide incentives to companies. The companies take the incentive and then they're out of there. What's to prevent that from happening in this situation?
Well, I think there is a provision in the bill that requires them to stay there for 15 years, and if they don't, they have to give the benefits back. And so, that is a good provision, but I still don't think obviously I don't believe it's a good bill. I still believe it's terrible to give taxpayer money to companies, and, they even acknowledge, those who are pushing the bill, they acknowledged that it was going to lose money over the first 10 years, that we would be in the red. And so, this isn't going to be a money-making deal, especially at first. They're acknowledging that it's going to cost us money, and I think our focus needs to be on reducing debt, like you said, and I also think that we should reduce or even eliminate the sales tax on food. And I, joined with the Democrats. I was one of only 6 Republicans who co-sponsored the Democrats' bill to repeal the sales tax on food, and I joined that because it was something I believe in, but it was, we were basically kind of being discouraged from co-sponsoring it because it was all a partisan thing, and I don't believe in partisanship. I just believe in doing, what is right.
All right, and I'm going to leave that there because we are running out of time already. We have 4 other things to talk about yet today. It took 2 tries and some unexpected votes, but Republicans managed to overturn the governor's veto of their congressional redistricting map. Let's go back to Jackson Overstreet.
Despite a last-ditch effort by Kansas Democrats Wednesday afternoon
to ask you to sustain the governor's veto.
By a single vote, the House overturned Governor Laura Kelly's veto of the Republican-supported redistricting map for reorganizing the state's 4 congressional seats.
Seeing an 85 voted in favor and 37 against, the passage of Senate Bill 355. The same members received the 2/3 majority. The bill is hereby declared passed.
The map has drawn criticism from Democrats and outside groups for splitting up voters in Wyandotte County and putting the city of Lawrence into the 1st District, which covers most of western and central Kansas, weakening Democrats' voting power in the state.
This sort of gerrymandering is reflective of an uncomfortable but nonetheless pretty obvious truth. Some types of people are a lot more likely to vote for the Republican Party than other types of people.
Dr. Russell Arbin Fox, a political science professor with Friends University, says this move will mostly impact voters currently in U.S. Representative Sharice David's district around Kansas City.
I mean, can they still vote? Of course they can still vote. But the likelihood of them getting the kind of representation they want has been made much less.
While the map does split up Democratic voters, Dr. Fox says it probably will not get overturned if the state gets sued for gerrymandering.
They might get support from the state Supreme Court. They might be able to take it to the appellate level, but taking it all the way to the Supreme Court level would take so long and the chances are so iffy.
And after this story aired originally on Cake TV, hearing that they are expecting lawsuits within another day or so of this recording, as far as that goes, possibly from a voter in either Wyandotte or Douglas County, Lawrence. Yeah, all of a sudden I blanked on that. So this is not over. The vote is over, but the fight over these maps has not finished yet. And this is nothing new, Henry. We seem to see this every 10 years.
It seems like it was 10 years ago the courts redrew the boundaries. I wasn't in at that time, but they reached a conflict and they stepped in and tried to draw it as fairly as they possibly could. Other states have gone to the models of having a nonpartisan group draw the boundaries as fair as they can. You know, I know that I tend to believe that that's the way we should go because it gives everybody an opportunity to be equally represented. And I looked at the map, but I didn't study it, so I don't know who was disenfranchised and who was not, clearly. But I think that's a model that we should look at more.
I know, it kind of surprised me when I came to Kansas because I cut my teeth in covering politics in Iowa where they have that nonpartisan model in place. And they're actually talking about removing it. Lots of fighting both at the local and national level over gerrymandering, redistricting, what is and isn't allowed anymore.
Right. As far as the map is concerned, I don't think there is any such thing as a perfect map. I don't think this map is perfect, but I think it can be defended on the basis that the big 1st district has lost a lot of population. We've lost a lot of population in rural Kansas, and so at this point it isn't really possible to just have the big 1st relegated to western Kansas. They did have to expand into eastern Kansas. A lot of people may not realize that Manhattan is already part of the 1st district now, and it, during the last redistricting it did have to expand into Manhattan, into eastern Kansas in order to make up for population losses, and we've continued to lose population since then, and so we did have to take another big town in eastern Kansas, whether it was Lawrence or Topeka or some other big town. There was another big town that had to be taken and put into the 1st district, and that seems like the most controversial thing, or the people have pointed out, is Lawrence being in the 1st district. But if it hadn't been Lawrence, it would have had to been Topeka, I think, or some other big town would have had to been put into the 1st.
We could have given you part of Wichita.
Well, in that kind of trade-off, it seems like has played a role in how this override happened. One of the swing votes that turned that no override into an override this week came from State Senator Mark Steffen. In return, he got something he wanted, at least temporarily: action on a bill involving vaccine exemptions and ivermectin. During an interview on KCMO Talk Radio, Senator Mark Steffen said his bill on prescribing off-label treatments for COVID was part of the discussion during his negotiations with Senate leaders on redistricting. We came to a mutual agreement, he said. The next day, before the veto override came up again in the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee endorsed Steffen's bill. In addition to explicitly allowing the prescription of off-label drugs like ivermectin to treat COVID, it requires pharmacists to dispense the drugs when presented with a prescription, even if they have concerns about the drug's safety. Stephan also got the committee to add an amendment that would allow parents to claim religious exemptions to any vaccine requirements at schools and daycare facilities. Senator Mike Thompson said the amendment simply broadens existing law, giving children the same protection at schools and daycares that unvaccinated adults already have in the workplace. A short time later, Stephan switched from a no to a yes on the veto override. And a quick note, on Thursday then, after all of this had happened, Senate President Ty Masterson stripped both Stephan and Senator Alicia Straub, who had also been a no vote, who switched to yes, of their committee assignments and sent the bill back to committee. Kind of a pretty powerful statement there on all of that horse trading that went on. Henry, you've been around the longest.
Remember that commercial that said, you don't mess with Mother Nature? You don't mess with the Senate President or the Speaker of the House. You know, we think, legislators think they have leverage. And you mentioned how sometimes I'm a rebel or, cause a problem. But you also can pay a price for it. And in this case, this was a very important bill to the Republican majority. And you don't try to blackmail certain people in order to get your vote, regardless of how you feel about the bill. It's a dangerous game. And
I don't necessarily, agree with their approach as far as how they did things, but at the same time, I do also think it, in my opinion, goes too far to strip them of their committee seats too, because I think there should be some room for independent thought, and also not everyone who voted against the map did so for those reasons. I think there was at least one senator who voted against it, just because they thought it was a bad map, and he was punished. Yeah, and he was punished too, even though he wasn't, playing any games or anything. They still stripped him of his committee assignments just because he opposed the map, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that they should be stripping members of their committee assignments just because they happen to disagree on something. There should be room for disagreement, and like I said, it shouldn't just be all about partisanship or being with your party. It should be about doing what's right, and that's ultimately what we should all do and strive to do, is just do what's right and not always just go along with our party leadership.
All right.
And I agree, but it comes down to you will pay a price, and that's why you always stand up for your own principles. And then the price is not too great.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have some other things to talk about as well. And this is one that we might see some bipartisan agreement on. The state's top law enforcement officer says holes in Kansas law are letting convicted violent criminals get away with using guns when they commit new crimes. He shared his proposals to change that with me earlier this week. Violent crimes like this shooting at the Enigma nightclub last September have been on the rise across Kansas.
We had a record number of homicides year before last, and far too many this last year. And
in an increasing number of cases, the suspects, like in the Enigma shooting, are already convicted felons accused of using guns to commit another crime.
They're not supposed to be armed because they're a convicted felon, and the law says you're not supposed to carry a gun, and yet they have that gun the next time they commit a crime.
So Kansas top law enforcement officer, Attorney General Derek Schmidt, is asking state lawmakers to increase the penalty, make it a presumption of prison time rather than probation, which is the current default sentence.
They possess that firearm when they're committing a new violent felony, that they get mandatory prison time that runs consecutive to whatever their other sentence is.
That prison time could be anywhere from 7 to 23 years, depending on the crime and the criminal. Schmidt says he came to Wichita Tuesday to meet with the Kansas Gang Investigators Association.
It was warmly received by the folks who work day to day in the community.
And it's not the only legal loophole he has his eye on. Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard testimony on his proposal to make time on the sex offender registry part of the penalty for transmitting child pornography through the internet. He says it's a simple case of the law not keeping up with new technology and new crimes.
It's a hole in the law we've observed in some of our cases. We've asked the legislature to fix it.
Schmidt's hoping to get bipartisan support for both measures. All right, well, he wants bipartisan support. What do you guys think?
I mean, it sounds like I support the concept of it. I am somebody who cares a lot about the details of legislation, and so I would need to spend some time, going through the legislation and looking at the details, because I think, the devil's always in the details, and I just consider myself to be a, principled legislator, and sometimes I'll see something in a bill and vote against it, even though the concept may be good, but there might be something in it that isn't good. And so, that's what I'll do with this bill as well. It is a bill that sounds good and sounds like it'll have bipartisan support, but I will want to, read through the details of it and make sure there's not something in it that isn't good or that I don't like.
Okay, Henry?
It sounds, it's great opportunity, great opening for bipartisan support. Now, I'll just mention, whenever we talk about guns, you have both parties run both to the extremes. And if there's a way of trying to, it's the same way we talk about taxes and people run to extreme. If there's a way of bridging the gap and finding reasonable solutions in the details as you're talking about, that'd be great. We should look for all those opportunities.
And I know when I spoke with Derek Schmidt about this, who is, as we all know, running for governor as well, he was very careful to point out several times, this isn't a new gun law. This is just taking a gun law that already exists. It's already illegal for felons to possess a gun. And instead of having the presumption of probation being the primary penalty, it will now be a presumption of prison time. That's the only change he's talking about. Very careful tap dancing there.
Very careful tap dancing, and we've had some similar amendments. In fact, I think I carried one on the House floor for 4 or 5 years ago, and it immediately broke down to partisan, wrangling. So I welcome the opportunity to sit down with him or whoever he would like and try to bridge the gap.
All right. What do you think, Brett?
Yeah, I do support the concept of cracking down on violent crime, but like I said, it depends on the details, and I would want to, discuss it with other like-minded legislators and get their opinion and perspective on it. But it's something I'll have to, study a little bit more. But I mean, the concept of it, as far as cracking down on violent crime, certainly sounds good.
I know we're short, but one of the things that really is necessary is you have to have people that trust each other. We trust each other, and we can work together. Hopefully, the general can reach out to somebody that he can trust so that they could build that kind of legislation.
All right. We'll have to find out what happens. It was just read in this last week, so we will see where it goes. Finally today, a Kansas high school principal is at the center of a controversy over a lesson about social justice. As KMUW's Suzanne Perez shows us, school board members made the principal apologize for showing an anti-racism video.
During a teacher workday last month, Derby High School Principal Tim Hamblin showed a video by Black author Joy DeGruy. In it, DeGruy relates a story about being treated differently at a store and how her lighter-skinned sister-in-law spoke up for her.
And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
A teacher who attended the meeting told a school board member they found the video offensive and that it created a hostile work environment. The board member directed Hamblin to apologize to employees, which he did in an email this week. Neither Hamblin nor district officials would comment on the situation. For KMUW News, I'm Suzanne Perez.
And really not given not much of a surprise given the ongoing debate over what we teach in schools, how we teach in schools, and the concern about critical race theory. Is this something that you guys are hearing more about from constituents at this point, Henry?
With this particular issue, no. Okay. I've been hearing, about a few other issues, but not this.
Really? What other issues have you been hearing about?
Oh, taxes, budget.
Gotcha.
What's going to happen to the sales tax on food? Are they going to? Are you going to get around to getting it done? Not critical race theory.
I'm going to ask Brett, what about you? Have you been hearing about that?
Well, I represent a more conservative district, and so I have gotten some emails in the past, against critical race theory, and it is something that I'm opposed to, but I would have to actually watch the video to see whether I would consider that to be critical race theory. In general, I do think that the schools and teachers should just teach the basic subjects and basically stick to that and try to prepare students for the workforce, and that's generally what I think. I think controversial social issues is better for schools and teachers to just stay away from. I think that's something that can be handled, outside of public schools. I think public schools, their main role is, like I said, just to prepare students for the workforce and for their life, and I think that's the role that schools should stick to.
Now, this really does play right into as well the debate over transparency of curriculums that sprang up at the State House this last week through various discussions, and we're seeing in many other states as well. I've been hearing from a lot of teachers very concerned about the idea that they would have to have their entire year's curriculum, all materials involved, ready to post online before the school year starts. Most teachers have one unit planned, maybe two at that point. What's the discussion like at the State House on that?
You know, I haven't heard too much about it. There was a teacher in my district who messaged me about it and said he had some concerns about it. I haven't really had time to look too much into the details of it. I'm not sure if it, requires them to post it in advance or it requires them to do it retroactively after the year is over. I'd have to look more into the...
It's in advance.
In advance?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that, as Republicans, we are supposed to be in favor of fewer regulations, and so you could look at it from the perspective of, it's more regulations, but at the same time, we're also against critical race theory, and maybe it's an attempt to try to keep critical race theory out of the classroom. And so from a conservative Republican perspective, there's probably different ways that you could look at it. And I think I think there are 7 senators who co-sponsored that bill. I think I'd probably need to talk to them and try to find out from them what their purpose of it is, and ask them about the if they think that the regulations are, don't go too far, or reasonable regulations. I think I would probably want to talk to those senators and get their perspective on it, and just, talk to different people and get different perspectives on the bill. Well,
Henry, you've got a different perspective. What is it?
2 points. First, we're going to have a teacher shortage. It's because it's so demanding, so it can be a hostile environment. But it's also, education is supposed to be about challenging people and creating that environment where children and adults crave more and look for additional information. And I'm concerned that we got to go a little bit more the other way at times and give teachers more flexibility.
All right.
I know we're out of time.
Yep, we're going to have to leave that there. Thank you both, Henry and Brad, for joining me this week. I've really enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. I'd love to continue the conversation with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas. For now, stay safe and have a great week.